All right, welcome to lesson 7 in week 8. We are almost over the hump. All right, so this is week 8. So once we get past week 8, we'll actually pass the halfway point. Getting much closer to our travel, incidentally. Today is February 28th, so it's only um, March, April. Hey, so 2.5 months. We'll be touching down in Italy. So this week is a really important topic. This is the big one, folks. This is probably the biggest single sustainability issue in the world today. And that's no exaggeration. Climate change is a big deal, as I'm sure, as I imagine anyway, you've all heard at least something about it. It's been a lot it's been in the news for a while. It's been a big issue for a while, but it's kind of really come to the fore the last couple of years, and there's a little bit more widespread acceptance in the United States that it's a problem. We have to do something about it. Now we get to argue about what to do about it. And there are potentially a lot of solutions, so that's the good news. The bad news is it's pretty hard to get the big solutions done with current political climate because a lot of these solutions do require policy. Um, anyway, we can talk more about that, but really the point of this week's lesson is just to give you some good foundational knowledge of climate change, some of the issues related to it, like climate justice, and you're going to learn how the greenhouse effect works. I mean, it's pretty basic when you boil it down to the greenhouse effect. But then we're going to go into some of the you know which greenhouse gases, what they are, and which ones we're most worried about, and why, and so forth. So it's a pretty good overview lesson. Some of it's pretty heavy, so you want to take some time to go through this. Again, this is a really important issue. This is what I guess this is probably a sociological term, what sociologists call a wicked problem. Wicked problem. And it's a problem that just doesn't have a straightforward solution. In fact, there may be any number of solutions. But it's one of those problems that just is interconnected into a lot of other problems. And climate change really fits that bill. Gets this tied into energy and lifestyle, economics, and food and transportation. Basically, all the things that humans do in society pretty much has an impact on climate change. Anyway, big deal, big problem. So I hope you take the time to get through the content. A couple of cartoons here. And then, it's good to read the introduction. It kind of gives you a feel for sort of how we are kind of really highly dependent on fossil fuels. Um, and as you'll see, I mean, it's not hard to find information that verifies that most of energy comes from fossil fuels and it's projected to continue to come from fossil fuels. So really, any projection you look at, unfortunately, from a climate change perspective, it's pretty fossil fuel heavy. So that's something that we have to address. And there's just some other, this is a pretty cool dynamic chart from Argo and data. Feel free to play around with that and some other charts. Um, but yeah, I do suggest reading through this page. It provides, kind of sets the table, if you will. And then we'll go into a few different topics. So we start with just basics, the difference between renewable and non-renewable energy sources. Also a discussion of carbon-free and carbon neutral. And this is basically it's a series of videos. Um, there you go. So these are some good short videos that explain the difference between some of these fossil fuel sources, and then there's a summary videos. That gives you an idea of our main energy sources. And then we'll get into the greenhouse effect itself. And so we'll look at the science of the greenhouse effect, like how does it work? Again, the science, the 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 process is not super complicated. Um, in a nutshell, sunlight comes down, and most of that sunlight is not absorbed by the atmosphere. If that sunlight is absorbed by something on or near the surface, then that radiates energy back up, and that type of radiation is readily absorbed by the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the solar energy that gets through is converted to a different wavelength, um, and then it comes back up, and then it's absorbed by the greenhouse gases, and then they emit the radiation in all directions. Some of it goes back down toward the surface, and that's how it keeps it warm. So it's not like a blanket, but it has the same impact, I guess you could say, as a blanket. So it's like putting the effect of putting a blanket around the Earth and just not allowing that heat to escape. But that video gives you some more details. And then there's a reading here. Um, it's pretty extensive, so you want to take some time to read it, but it goes over some of the facts and the myths surrounding climate change, sort of what we know and what we're not entirely sure about. Um, and then a few readings from NASA. Does a lot of climate change, provides a lot of climate change based information or climate based information because they operate satellites. But also NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Aeronautics Association. So they do things with weather and climate. That's really the main function. Um, and then a little brief explanation of where we need to head with our emissions goals. So that's from the United Nations. Um, the United Nations does a lot of uh, provides a lot of information and also facilitates global climate energy policy, if you will. So they convene these conferences mostly through the auspices of the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Quite a tongue twister. And they meet every year at the at the UN. Well, actually, it's convened by the UN, but they meet at different places all around the world. Like they were in Scotland recently. The most recent one was in Egypt. So they go to different places across the world, and they all the countries that participate, something like 260, 270. They get together and they discuss the latest science on climate change. They discuss how their countries can craft policy to address climate change, and they come out with these really big reports every 5 years. And those reports are considered basically the highest level of climate research that's done in the world because all these countries get together, they bring their best scientists to these conferences, and it's a very thorough document. And just imagine getting all 200 plus countries to agree on like a 500-page report. And they have to agree on every single word of that report. It has to be a unanimous agreement. So um, it's really high level uh, research that a lot of other, you know, institutions and organizations and universities and governments and so forth, they'll look to these reports to help sort of guide them through the process. And so the United Nations plays a really big role in climate change, addressing climate change globally. And they will certainly continue to do so. So that's just gives you an idea of, um, you know, sort of emissions targets, what we need to target. And the short story with that is that there's widespread agreement that we need to be carbon neutral globally by around 2050, which means we have to cut our emissions in half relative to 2005 levels by 2030. So it's a lofty goal, but something that can be accomplished if we all get together and sort of like for the cost. And then finally, we'll go over a little bit of the issues related to who is most responsible for emissions. And it's not such a simple story. China is the world leader in emissions, but then the U.S. emits about twice per person than compared to China. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And then you think about with China, a lot of their emissions are due to manufacturing, um, which is to provide stuff for countries like the United States. And so it's like when you get into carbon accounting and who's really responsible for that, it's actually a little trickier than it might sound. But that provides a little bit of discussion of that, and also look at some of the inequities in emissions and so forth. Um, and that's it for this week. So hopefully that gives you a nice overview of the science behind climate change, what we know and what we don't know. You have a decent sense of different types of energy, what's renewable, what's non-renewable, what's carbon free, carbon neutral, and then also a sense of some of the broader issues and broader implications of climate change, such as who is most responsible for emissions, who is most impacted by emissions, and also how can we, what are the what's widely agreed upon as the necessary targets for emissions reductions in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So, like most of the other topics we've discussed, this is a huge, huge topic that we could spend a whole semester focusing just on this. So this is an overview, but hopefully it provides you with some key information, and even more so, I hope it provides you with some incentive, some motivation, to really be part of the solution for climate change. And I'll end with the fact that the single biggest role that you can play as an individual in addressing climate change, it's not your lifestyle as much, although that does drive less, get renewable energy, get local food, that sort of thing. The biggest that we can play is actually who you vote for. And I know uh, politics can be kind of a four-letter word these days, but climate change should be a nonpartisan issue. We all need to figure out how to solve this problem. Certainly, there are different paths to the solution, and we can, hopefully just start disagreeing and about the path and not about the science. I mean, the science is settled. It's really there's just not really room for debate anymore. Very, very minimal, but it's really just peripheral. And so we should just be figuring out how to solve this problem. And the only way we're going to solve it is by making big, big changes, like how goods are produced, how, you know, the resources that are used by companies to manufacture and the waste that they emit, requiring companies to go net zero, um, that sort of thing, requiring, subsidizing renewable energy so it's just as cheap as fossil fuels. I mean, that's the only way we're going to get to our goal. Ultimately, we need to make the easy and cheap decision the more sustainable one. And that kind of goes across the board, but certainly for climate change, the only way we're going to solve the problem is if it's just as cheap, if not cheaper, and just as convenient, if not more convenient, to get the more sustainable option, the carbon-free option, renewable energy and so forth, than it is uh, to the option that causes emissions. Okay, so I think I've rambled enough for my introduction. I apologize for that. It's a little bit late, and this is a topic that I am really sort of deeply engaged with a lot. So I'm happy to have further discussions with you all about this topic as we move forward. So hopefully you enjoyed the content.